Hello mate and welcome back to Let's Code Season 6. This is episode 23 and we're going to start adding some more cool functionality in this episode. In fact, what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to add the ability to attack enemies. I'm also going to prove that the pathfinding algorithm works as it's written in the code that I provided. So without further ado, let's jump right into this. First thing that we need to add to our player class is two new methods which are decorated with the property decorator. One gives us get total defense and one is get total attack. And these are the methods that are going to check the inventory, find out if we've got any weapons or armor, and then add their respective values to our total damage output or our total defense. This is nice and simple, so all we're going to do is we're going to start off with total defense is equal to the get defense getter that we set up when we first created this class, and our damage and defense should be set at a base level of 1. You can set these numbers to however you want, but I'm going to keep them at 1. Then what we do is we say for thing in self.getInventory, so we're going to loop through the 4 items in our inventory if we've got 4 items, and then we're going to check if is subclass type thing armor. Now we created a new class for armor based on our game object class, because if you remember a couple of episodes ago we added a shield of defending or shield of blocking, and that is what we've checked for here. We're saying if the thing in the inventory that we're currently looking at, if the class that it is made from is a subclass of the armor class, then we will add the get amount value of that thing to our total defense, and then we'll return the number. So if we have the shield of blocking and it has a value of 2, then we'll add that 2 to our original 1, and that will give us a total defense of 3. Exactly the same method for get total attack, only this time we are checking for the subclass of our weapon class. Now weapon is very similar to armor. It's just a separate subclass that we've created, pretty much identical to armor, but we need 2 separate subclasses so that we can differentiate between armor and weapons when it's within our inventory. And we've now checked and we've got our total attack, which is again a base level of 1, and we're adding the value of any weapons that we've got in our inventory to that total attack, and then we're returning that total attack as an integer, which we can then use in damage calculations when we actually attack the enemy mobs and when they attack us. The next thing that we need to add is, I've highlighted it down here in green. This is a method, an abstract method that we need to add to our entity class. And all it does is it says that every entity must have an interact method, and we must pass the player as a property or an argument to it. Now, obviously, the abstract method doesn't do anything, so we've just put pass in there. Whereas in the previous abstract methods, we've actually added some code. But realistically, we have to, because it's an abstract method, we must rewrite these methods in these subclasses anyway. So yeah, we don't necessarily need to put any code in there, so that's why we haven't. And the interact method is going to be, it's so called because not all of our entities are going to be enemy mobs. Some of them might be NPCs, some of them might be treasure chests, some of them might just be rocks and trees that make up part of the landscape. So when we interact with those objects, obviously we're not going to do the same thing as when we interact with an enemy mob. But in this case, the thing that we're going to create is an enemy mob. So that, of course, will be take damage when we interact with it. Now, of course, the next thing we need to do is go into our move player method within the room class. And where we've already checked to see if we're interacting with a game object, like we do in this method, we now need to add another elif statement, which I've highlighted again in green here. Elif is subclass type self. And all we're doing here is we're checking, is the object that we're trying to interact with a subclass of the entity class? If it is, then we're going to call its interact method and we'll pass the player in as an object. We've already got the player in this method, as you can see at the top here, that it's passed as an argument to this method. So we can just pass that straight on to the interact method of the thing that we're trying to interact with. So now, if we interact with a game object, it will do the pickup method of that object. And if it's an entity, then it will interact with it using the interact method, again passing the player as an object. So far, nothing too complicated, nice and simple. What I've also added to our room class is another method called remove object. And much like the remove player method, all it does is it finds the X and Y position of the thing that we want to remove, and it sets that X and Y position in the matrix to be 0. That's literally what it is. We don't need to delete anything. If we remove the reference to that class from the matrix that we're in, it won't show it on the screen anymore, and it effectively is dead. So that's all we're doing. We just pass whatever it is that we're trying to remove from the room in as an argument. It'll find its position and it'll remove it from the matrix. So that's a whole new method to go within the room class. And that will allow us to remove enemy objects from the matrix once we've defeated them. So the interact method for our enemy subclass is going to look a bit like this here at the bottom. You can see we've still got interact and we're still taking the player as an argument. Now what we're doing is we're adding a message to the screen saying attacking the something for something damage, and we're passing in the name of the object that's being attacked and the total attack value of the player to there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call a method called take damage, and I'll show you that method in a moment. Now that method is going to return a true or false value depending on whether the object is alive or not at the end of it. So if self.takeDamage and then we pass in player.getTotalAttack is going to be the number, the integer value from that getTotalAttack value within our player class, and that's going to subtract from this object or from this entity's hit points the amount of damage that the player has dealt. If the object dies, then it will return true, and we will say on the screen player.addMessage something has been vanquished, and then we're going to replace the something with the name of the object, and then we're going to call that remove object method that we just created, and this object is going to pass itself in as a parameter, so it's effectively going to remove itself from the matrix if it's being killed. If the take damage method returns false, that means that the object is not dead, and so it doesn't need to do either of those two lines of code, so it'll just do nothing. It'll sit there fat, dumb and happy and wait for the player to attack it again or move or whatever, depending on what happens. If the update method is called, then obviously so far all that will happen is this guy will try and move again, and he'll move towards the entity path or the object that it's decided it wants to go on. So what does the take damage method look like, I hear you cry? This is what the take damage method looks like. So again, this goes into the entity class, and it's a method that's called take damage, and all we do is we pass in an amount. It will then remove that amount from the hit points of the object. If the hit points then drop below 0 or equal to 0, then we will return true. Otherwise, we return false. So this is how this method tells the method that calls it, yeah, I've taken damage and I'm dead, or I'm alive. Now, ironically, or not ironically, but weirdly, we're returning true to say we're dead. So this is what this method is doing, is saying, yeah, I'm dead, when it says return true. And then it will call the remove object method from the room object, and it will remove itself from the grid, and that will effectively kill it. So here we are in the game. If I move the mouse over to the next button and I just move my player away, hit next a few times, you can see our object's path finding towards us. And if I sweep round and start attacking it, you can see it's attacking it for 1 damage because I don't have any armor or weapon. And then I vanquish it and it disappears from the screen. So much like some of the other work that we've done recently, because we've already laid the groundwork for most of the functionality, implementing this other functionality is now actually really simple. It's very short methods, nothing too strenuous, and what we've got now is effectively we've got a game engine where we can design our own rooms using prefabs. We can add objects to our rooms also using the prefabs, and we can have enemies running around looking for us, and then we can fight them and kill them. Obviously, the next thing that we need to do is actually have enemies that fight back, which will probably be something we tackle in the next video. But until then, hopefully this was good, you enjoyed it, and it was useful for you. I will see you in the next one, but until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, alright? Bye-bye!